People just want to make sure that they're being treated fairly for the work that they're doing, the performance that they have, and the impact that they actually have on the organization.
Today's ever-changing talent market has employers looking for a new roadmap to attract and retain workers. What role does organizational culture play? And what is the path to creating a truly inclusive workplace? With insights on those topics and more, I'm happy to welcome ADP Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer, Tiffany Davis. Tiffany, glad to have you here.
Thank you, Tina. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we have a bunch of questions for you, so let's just dive right in. How has the business case for diversity and inclusion evolved the past few years?
It's very important to think about the impact that inclusion and diversity can actually have on not only just innovation, but revenue, profitability, creativity, and also the ability to continue to solve problems. So as I think about the case, I think the evolution continues to happen as the future of work also continues to change as well.
So if you think about workers and the expectations now, how has that affected the employers as in terms of their approach for D&I?
It's no longer just a nice to have, but it's truly an imperative for the success of the organization. And there's many considerations that have to be in play, such as flexibility, such as things like PTO, compensation, equitable access to opportunities.
So if you think about what you said, embedded in the culture, so what are those key topics or initiatives that really encompass D&I?
So it's interesting you say that. I think it's important to talk about a number of different facets. And, one of the things that I like to talk about is first inclusion. So inclusion is so important as you think about this strategy, because inclusion is, really the act of workers feeling welcome, but also valued, which I think is important. And inclusion is truly important before you can actually appreciate the differences, which is the diversity facet of this equation. From there, you go to equity, and it's really around how do you make people feel valued through things like your rewards and your recognitions, and that people are being treated fairly. And then finally, I would say belonging. As I continue to think about that feeling of actually being valued, belonging is so important as you think about workers and the workplace that they actually do work in as well.
So you talked a little bit about equity. So tell me a little bit more in terms of how does that impact building that inclusive culture?
Absolutely. So we can talk about something like pay equity, for example. One of the things that I think about as it relates to pay equity, there's a huge opportunity to ensure that our workers within any organization understands, number one, what pay equity actually means. Also, I think how organizations are evaluating pay equity from the perspective of understanding what are your normal practices that you have in place on an annual basis to ensure that equitable pay exists. So pay equity is so important, but I think there's also this opportunity to make sure that workers are educated as well as leaders are educated to really have the conversation around what pay equity means and how that actually applies to that individual worker.
And I think that's really important because you talk about transparency, but it's also the openness as it relates to having that conversation, and it's also more clarity.
I think, one of the things about conversations, right, and again, I'm very passionate about courageous conversations, and sometimes you can consider pay conversations really courageous conversations. But what I found is that when you have a conversation, rather people agree with you on everything that you're actually discussing, there's generally a respect for, the opportunity to even engage in the conversation, to engage around the topic and even bring awareness. And so that's when I go back to the conversation around even thinking about what are the practices that are in place in an organization to review inequities and to close pay gaps. It, again, is very important for just creating that environment of transparency.